mouthful. Anyway, so here is the big picture. There's a lot to learn. Go the path through the digestive system, fine. Then make sure you know which organs are retroperitoneal versus intraperitoneal. There's a whole bunch of models and pictures to look at. Know the layers of the wall of the GI tract, fine. Know the difference between serosa and adventitia, where each are found. Then on the second page, there's all this microscope slide stuff to look at. So there's a lot. Again, this is going to be on Thursday. The good news is it's your last quiz, so that's good. But there's a lot of information. Now, the fetal pig stuff, you don't have to worry about the fetal pig for the quiz, but it will be on the next lab practical, so you will need to know it for that. So we'll combine the fetal pig from digestive when we do the fetal pig with the urinary, so it'll just be simpler. So let me run through these things. The first thing is just knowing the path of food through the digestive system. This isn't all that tough. Hopefully you'll get this right. So it starts with your mouth, right? Then make sure you know make sure you know the specifics too. So specifically after the mouth, where does the food go? More specific than pharynx. Oropharynx. And then after oropharynx, where does it go? Laryngopharynx. Then it's going to go into the esophagus. Then it's going to go into the stomach. Then it'll go into your small intestine. Specifically, it's going to go into the duodenum first. Then it's going to go into the jejunum. And then finally, it'll go into the ileum. Now, after it leaves the ileum, it's going to go into your large intestine. And the first part of the large intestine, which is in the right lower quadrant, is called the cecum. After the cecum, you then get into the colon. So as you go up, this is called the ascending colon. There's a sharp turn over here that you really can't see, but that turn is called the hepatic flexure. So it's going to turn there. Then as it goes across, it's called the transverse colon. Then there's another sharp turn, and that's called the splenic flexure. And as it goes down, you're then in the descending colon. Then there's kind of this sort of big squiggly spot of the colon called the sigmoid colon. Then you get into the rectum, then into the anal canal, and then into the anus. So that's the path of food through the system. And then the retroperitoneal organs, this is just showing you kind of the thing. Now again, instead of just like going in and hardcore memorizing it, which you can do that if you want to, but try to visualize it. And if you can just think of things, you know, like look at this thing. I should have done this with the class this morning. You take one of these models and you take out all the junk that's on the inside. Most of the stuff that's still like left behind there is going to be retroperitoneal. Now, I see that they didn't do something. Well, you know what? Don't look at that. But in general, if it's towards the back, it's going to be retroperitoneal, or if it's pushed to the sides, it'll be retroperitoneal. So, you know, the kidneys and the adrenal glands that are on top of the kidneys, they're way to the back. They're definitely retroperitoneal. The pancreas is a little bit weird because the head and the body are retroperitoneal, but then the tail is intraperitoneal. All of the duodenum, which surrounds the head, is retroperitoneal. The ascending and the descending colon are kind of pushed to the sides. They're both retroperitoneal, whereas the transverse colon and the sigmoid colon, which are kind of more floppy and sort of hanging in the middle, they're going to be intraperitoneal. Your two main big blood vessels, the inferior vena cava, the aorta, they're way to the back. They're definitely retroperitoneal. So that's it, basically. Now, let me go into the models here. Did I not bring that model? Is the sagittal face? Oh, there it is. Let's go. All right. So sagittal face model raises this ugly head again. Okay, so hold on, make this brighter. Great. So here's the mouth or the oral cavity, whatever you want to call it. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you on actually is not seen all that well here, but I got a fun thing you can do as soon as you leave class. You're going to love it. And that is, when you leave class, I want you to find the labial frenulum. The labial frenulum on this model is like right here for the lower lip, and then up there for the upper lip. You don't really see it well on this model, but what that is look in the mirror, pull your lower lip down, or pull your upper lip up, and you see that little bit of tissue that holds your gums to like your teeth. That's the labial frenulum. And if you get anyone here get punched in the face recently? Okay. Or have you given somebody a punch in the face? Anyway, either way, that can get torn. If you get like punched in the face, that little labial frenulum can get like torn. I've had mine torn several times.
So this kind of like, does it just drag or something? Or?
Well, you have enough other muscles that it probably wouldn't like be necessarily noticeable, like other muscles around there and things. I don't think it's known to. It's not the main thing that's like holding the whole. No. No. Oral cavity, like I said, it's basically the same as the mouth. Now, if you get towards the back of your oral cavity, there's kind of an imaginary line that connects the epiglottis with the uvula. That would be the fossa. So that if you're anterior to it, you're in the oral cavity. If you're posterior to it, you're in the oropharynx. Roof of your mouth, when you first like put a finger inside your mouth and touch up, you're going to notice that it's hard. That's all hard palate where the bone is. And then as you like kind of keep going backwards with your finger, it gets soft. That's where the soft palate is. This is obviously the uvula here. That's the thing that you don't want to pierce, right? The parotid, submandibular, and sublingual glands, I actually have to go to a different model for that. That's this model. So on this model, you look to one side on this model. This is the parotid gland. It's sort of inferior and anterior to your ear. Okay, so that's a big one. But then the way they did on this model, if you turn over to the other side, you can see the other two ones. So here's your tongue, and then this one that's right underneath the tongue, that would be the sublingual gland. And then this one that's even lower is the submandibular gland. Okay? So the mean salivary glands. Other stuff. So there's the tongue, fine. There's, so down here, that's going to be the lingual frenulum. And that's also something you could look at in the mirror after class if you want to do this. So look in the mirror, open your mouth, put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and then look at that little bit of tissue that's kind of holding the tongue to the floor of your oral cavity. That's the lingual frenulum that you see there. That's something that actually can be congenitally short in some people, and that's, I believe, called ankyloglossia is the technical name for it, but that's what they mean by being tongue-tied. They say that like when somebody can't speak, they say, oh, you're tongue-tied, but that's actually a real condition that people can have where they can't speak. And the operation is simple. They just cut it, and then the tongue's freed up, and then they can talk. But, the white things are the teeth, fine, or the denties if you want to be a snob. Other stuff you can see on here, remember this area up here is the nasopharynx. Then you have the oropharynx. Then you have the laryngopharynx. Esophagus starting down here. Now, the upper esophageal sphincter and the lower esophageal sphincter, I'm going to show you a diagram, but basically the upper esophageal sphincter is a muscle that forms a ring, and it attaches to the cricoid cartilage here. It then encircles the esophagus, goes around the esophagus, and then it reattaches to the cricoid. So it forms a ring around it, and that's called the cricopharyngeus muscle, and that's going to make the upper esophageal sphincter. So here's a picture showing this a little bit better over here. You can see there's the cricoid cartilage. Here's this ring-like muscle called the cricopharyngeus. It wraps around, it reattaches. So when this muscle contracts, it opens and closes the upper esophageal sphincter. Okay? So again, if you're like Lauren and you're good at burping out words, you have good control over the cricopharyngeus muscle. Okay? The lower esophageal sphincter is actually in the wall of the esophagus, and I'll show you that on the stomach model here.
I have a question in terms of like the mouth and the teeth.
Yeah?
Is the mouth like, is it actually like removable? So you know, like old people, they'll be like.
I mean, like dentures are removable.
But yeah, so like, so old people, like, why do they have like dentures in?
Well, because they lost all their teeth.
I need a chew, buddy.
Yeah.
Is that what did you know that?
No, I thought like the jaw was actually like moving. Like you know how the cartoons?
Yeah.
Like someone like take
You
off
know
like
that.
their mouth, their jaw, and then put in like a tub of water.
Oh,
Like
yeah, cartoons are not always accurate. Don't go there. Don't go there for a reliable source of information. They're oftentimes wrong. I lost my train of thought. Okay, sorry. I'm looking at the stomach now. Also, too, you know you can't run off a cliff, Xavier, and not look down and hope to just float there, right? You know that, right? Yeah. Okay, that doesn't work either. Don't try that. Okay, so this is the stomach. Before you even like open up the stomach, this is kind of the positioning of it. So this bulging area up here, that's the fundus. That's the thing that you'd wrap around if you're doing an Nissen fundoplication. This area, this region over here, is the cardiac because it's close to kind of the apex of the heart. The rest of this is going to be the body until you get to like this region back here, and then that would be the pyloric region or the pylorus. Also remember they have dumb names for the edges. So this dumb name for this big edge here is the greater curvature. And then the dumb name for this one here is the lesser curvature. The lesser curvature is going to be attached to the lesser omentum, and then the greater curvature is going to be attached to the greater omentum. And on this model, I think that's what they're trying to represent by that yellow kind of fat tissue there. That's supposed to represent the greater omentum that's attached there. Now, if you pull the stomach apart and you look inside, you're going to see all these folds. Those are the rugae. Make sure you know how to spell rugae. Don't spell it reggae. Okay? Those are the rugae. Those are going to disappear when the stomach fills up with food, right? Now, if you look, this is where the lower esophageal sphincter would be, and so it's actually just like a little muscle that's built into the wall of the esophagus. It's not like the cricopharyngeus, which is its own separate muscle. This is a muscle that's built into the wall of the esophagus. At the other end of the stomach down here, built into the wall here, that would be the pyloric sphincter. So lower esophageal sphincter controls movement of food into the stomach, and then the pyloric sphincter, or pyloric valve, they sometimes call it, controls the movement of the food out and into the duodenum. All right, pancreas. So here's the pancreas. Once again, get your bearings. This thing here that's forming kind of the letter C, that's the duodenum. So that's all duodenum coming around there. So this part that's surrounded by the duodenum, that's the head. And that's going to be retroperitoneal. As you continue along, this main part, like roughly through here, that would be the body. That's also retroperitoneal. But then when you get out to like this last little bit that's connected to the spleen, that's the tail, and that's going to be intraperitoneal. Other stuff that you can see on here, this thing in white, that's the main pancreatic duct. Now you could call it the main pancreatic duct if you wanted to, or if you just want to call it the pancreatic duct, that's fine. Technically, there is usually another smaller one that they call the accessory pancreatic duct that you can see there, but I'm not going to really split hairs. If you just say pancreatic duct, that's fine, referring to this one. Now, the pancreatic duct is going to meet up with the common bile duct, and you have to flip this model over. This is the common bile duct that's coming down from the liver. It's going to go kind of behind the pancreas and then up through the pancreatic tissue, and it's going to connect up with the pancreatic duct. And this model doesn't show the connection, but this model does, and you can see it right there. So there's the common bile duct coming in, there's the pancreatic duct, and the spot where they meet there, that's the hepatopancreatic ampulla. Okay. All right, the liver. Here's the liver. This is kind of what the position would be like when you're looking at someone. This little edge here, that's the falciform ligament. That's one of the peritoneal folds. That's what holds the liver in the right upper quadrant, attaches it to the diaphragm and to the anterior abdominal wall. Over on this side of it, the smaller part is the left lobe, and then this much bigger part is the right lobe. If you look on the inferior surface of the liver, that's when you're going to see the gallbladder and the biliary tree. So the biliary tree, that's just the fancy name they gave for all the bile ducts that are there. And unfortunately, none of our models really show the biliary tree very good. This is probably as good as it's going to get, but let me walk you through it. this little tiny branch that you see there that's going over in this direction to where the left lobe is, that's the left hepatic duct. So that's draining all the bile that's coming from that left lobe. And then I really wish they would have just made this a little bit longer, but that little stub that you see going up in that direction, that would be the right hepatic duct that's going to be draining the right lobe. As soon as the two of them come together, in other words, when you're in this area, that's when they call that the common hepatic duct. This over here, of course, is the gallbladder. That is going to be the cystic duct that connects it. As soon as the cystic duct meets up with the common hepatic duct, they change the name, and then this is called the common bile duct. The common bile duct is what then goes down kind of behind the duodenum and up through the pancreas and meets up with the pancreatic duct. Okay? So that's what's going on there. Small intestine, so the duodenum is the first part, and the duodenum is pretty easy to identify because it forms this thing that kind of looks like the letter C that surrounds the head of the pancreas, okay? What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to give you like some random piece of small intestine without some reference point and make you name it. Like I'm not just going to show you this and be like, what's that? Okay? I'll always give you something. So obviously if I show you that other one and you see that position, you should know that that's the duodenum. But for me to just pull something out here and say, what is this? I mean, well, first of all, you should know it's not duodenum, but the question is it jejunum or is it ileum? I'm not going to ask you that just by pulling something out that. If I want to ask you about the jejunum, for example, I could go back to this model and say, what's this? And that technically represents the beginning of the jejunum. So there's an attachment point over here, and at that attachment point, as soon as the small intestine starts to go down, you've just made the transition from the duodenum into the jejunum. So that's the beginning of the jejunum right there. But I'm not going to pull out some random loop in the middle and ask you what it is. Likewise, if I wanted to ask you about the ileum, I could maybe show you this model or maybe a model that's a little bit bigger than this one. And if I point to any kind of small intestine that's emptying into the large intestine, well, you should know, obviously, if it's emptying into the large intestine, then it must be the ileum, because that's the last part. But I'll always give you some kind of reference point. So next, other stuff to know about the small intestine. We do have a model that shows the wall of the small intestine. And that is not that, that's this. Okay, so I think the best thing to do when you first see these things is try to find your 4 layers, okay? From here on up is going to be mucosa. In here is submucosa. In there is muscularis, and then this last little layer down here would be serosa, okay? Now, the 3 parts that make up the mucosa, you've got the epithelial layer, which is going up and down and around. That's going to be a simple columnar epithelium. You've got the white space that's filled in there. That's going to be the lamina propria. And then the last part of the mucosa is this thin layer of muscle that's called the muscularis mucosae. Okay? This whole area in here is submucosa, like I said. Usually there's more going on there than there is in this model. I mean, this model is basically showing you arteries, veins, lymphatics, some fat tissue. But, if this is in the duodenum, there'll probably be some glands there that are called Brunner's glands. Or if this were in the ileum, you might see like the Peyer's patches there, okay? As for the muscularis layer, this is going to be the inner circular layer. And then this out here is going to be the outer longitudinal layer. And then, like I said, out here would be the serosa. Other stuff you can see on these models, each one of these big finger-like things is a villi. As the villi go kind of work their way down into this area here, or there, they call that an intestinal gland. The other name for that is like the crypts of Lieberkühn, which sounds like some level to beat on a video game, all right? Anyway, what else do we got going on here? Okay, large intestine, So large intestine, let me go back to this little model.
I think you might have skipped lacteal, but maybe you didn't.
Oh, did I skip lacteal? Oh, sorry, I might have skipped lacteal. So lacteals are just the guys in green. Okay, those are the lacteals. I don't think I missed anything else. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so large intestine. I've got kind of a small model of the large intestine, but that's okay. It still works. So the first, the entryway into the large intestine is this little valve here. That's the ileocecal valve. Why is it called the ileocecal valve? Well, because it's connecting the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestine, with the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestine. So it's called the ileocecal valve. So in other words, this whole area of the large intestine, which is in the right lower quadrant, it's fairly dilated, it's fairly good size. They call that area the cecum. You're technically in the large intestine, but you're not specifically in the colon yet. After you leave the cecum, then you'll be in the colon, and I'll mention all the parts of the colon in a second. Before I leave, though, the cecum, I just wanted to show you, on the back side of the cecum, or on the inferior side of the cecum, that's where you'd have this little guy, which is your appendix. And that's the thing that gives people a lot of problems, right? Appendicitis and all that stuff. Anyway, as you leave the cecum, then you're in the colon. The colon starts by going up first, and then it's called the ascending colon. Here, there's a sharp turn. They call that turn, because it sits where the liver is, they call that the hepatic flexure. Or they also call it, because it's on the right side, they call it the right colic flexure. You could use either name. Then the colon goes across, and when it's going across, they call it the transverse colon. Then it makes another sharp right turn. This time it's on the left side, so they call it the left colic flexure, or because it's close to the spleen, they call it the splenic flexure. Then it goes down. When it goes down, it's called the descending colon. Then, and they're not really showing it well on this model, but there would be a big squiggly part called the sigmoid colon. Then you get into the rectum. Then you get into like the anal canal, and I'll show you a diagram of that in a second. The sigmoid colon is usually really big and floppy, and when you go in for a colonoscopy, which you should do when you get older, that's the toughest part for them to get the scope around. That's the part where they're really like jamming it in. They're trying to put this anaconda up your butt, and you're like, are you done yet? Oh no, I'm not done yet. Something to look forward to. All right. Let me show you the diagram here. So this is just to show you. I just wanted to show you a little bit better picture of it. So on this particular one, this would be the ileum here. This would be the ileocecal valve where it's connected. This opening that you see there, that's actually supposed to represent the opening of the appendix, which is down there. This is the cecum. As you go up, it's the ascending colon. You then have the hepatic flexure. You go across, and that's the transverse colon. You got the splenic flexure up there. You go down, you're in the descending colon. This is where the sigmoid colon is. This would still be a lot bigger and more floppy than they're showing here, but at least it shows it better than that model did. And then as you go down into this part, you're in the rectum, which they're showing over here. And then finally you get into the anal canal and the actual opening, the anus. All right. Now, I don't have any good models really of the anus down here, but they want you to know two of the sphincters that are there. We'll tell you what these sphincters do on Thursday, but there's two of them. This one here, that's made out of smooth muscle, that's called the internal anal sphincter. And then this one that's on the outside here is made out of skeletal muscle, and that's called the external anal sphincter. One more thing I want to mention to you before I leave the large intestine. One key thing about the large intestine is this line that you see traveling across here and there. Those lines that you have, they're called the taenia coli. And they're actually, what they represent is they represent the outer longitudinal muscle layer. In the colon, or in the large intestine, the longitudinal muscle layer is not a complete layer. Instead, it exists in the form of these three stripes called the taenia coli. So that's a key feature when you're looking. You won't see taenia coli when you're looking at the small intestine. Another key feature of the large intestine are these kind of sacculations that you have along the length of it. The reason why you have those is because the actual length of the large intestine is longer than the tinea coli themselves is, so it kind of causes it to bunch up on itself. Those are called haustra. That's another key feature that you only see in the large intestine. All right. Now, for the peritoneal folds, I don't really have any good models that show the peritoneal folds. I mean, I got the liver model that shows like the falciform ligament, but the other models don't really show it. So make sure you look at like some pictures like this. This is a good sideways view that shows some of these. So you can see there's the greater omentum. The greater omentum is attached to the inferior border of the stomach, so it's attached to the greater curvature, and then it's also a little bit attached to the transverse colon. And then the whole thing just kind of drapes over the rest of your intestines, kind of like this fatty apron, right? So that's the greater omentum. The lesser omentum is connecting the superior border of the stomach, which is known as the lesser curvature, with the inferior border of the liver. And that was that thing that they spent a lot of time dissecting through during that laparoscopic cholecystectomy to show you the cystic duct. They spent a lot of time kind of cutting through that lesser omentum. Okay. And then the third, or the last, there's two more types of peritoneum you should know. The mesentery is what sort of loosely holds the small intestines in place, and then the mesocolon is what kind of anchors the transverse colon and hangs it sort of up in place. Okay. Now, as for the layers of the wall of the GI tract, make sure you know these 4 layers and the subdivisions within each. So this is all mucosa. It's made up of the epithelial layer, it's made up of the lamina propria, and then it's made up of the muscularis mucosae. Next, you have the submucosa, which on this diagram is pretty boring, but you might have glands in there, you might have lymphatic nodules in there. Then you get into the muscularis layer. Most places it's going to be inner circular, outer longitudinal. The exception is the stomach. It'll have inner oblique, middle circular, outer longitudinal. And then the very last thing on the outside is going to be either serosa or adventitia. Remember, if it's covered with visceral peritoneum, it'll be called serosa. If it's not, it's going to be called adventitia. So most of the time, when you're looking at abdominal organs, they'll generally have serosa there. But if you're looking at something like the esophagus, which is in the thoracic cavity, there's not going to be any peritoneum there, so it's going to be called adventitia. You know the difference between, yep, fine, I just did that. Now, let me go through the microscope slides. So this is a microscope slide of the esophagus. And honestly, you should make that diagnosis just based on looking at the epithelium, okay? That is a stratified squamous epithelium. It looks a hell of a lot like the epidermis does, okay? Go back and look at some epidermis if you need convincing. But this is the esophagus. This is a really good microscope slide. Let me walk you through the layers. So everything from here on up is mucosa. You got the stratified squamous epithelium. Right below it, you have the lamina propria. And then this thin, kind of darker, slightly darker staining pink, that would be the muscularis mucosa coming through there. Next, in this area, that's all submucosa. And then this down here is the muscularis layer. And you can kind of, if you squint a little bit, sort of see a little bit of a divider that's kind of running across there. So this would be the inner circular layer here, and then this would be the outer longitudinal layer there. Out beyond that, which there's not really much to look at, you might see some stray collagen fibers here or there. I mean, essentially out beyond that, that's where you'd have the adventitia. Here's another one, a stomach. I got a lot of repeats on these, but let me just go through it. So there's the epithelium, underneath it, lamina propria, muscularis mucosae, submucosa, and then this is all muscularis in here. You can again sort of see a divider there. So this would be like circular inner layer, outer longitudinal layer. One more, why not? There's the stratified squamous. Number 3 would be the lamina propria. Number 4, a little bit darker staining, is the muscularis mucosae. Number 5 is the submucosa. Here it's a little less boring. They've actually got a bunch of glands in this particular specimen. So all those little circular things are submucosal glands. Then you got the muscularis layer. 6A would be the circular sublayer, and then 6B would be the longitudinal sublayer, and then 7 out there would be the adventitia. Now this is a pretty cool slide because it's showing you the junction of the esophagus and the stomach. Notice down here, you have that stratified squamous epithelium that looks like epidermis again. So this is the end of the esophagus coming in. So this would be right in that region of the lower esophageal sphincter, right? And then as you get into this area over here, you're now switched over to the stomach, okay? I have some better pictures of the stomach that I'll go through, but basically these little indentations, those are called gastric pits. As these indentations go deeper, they form these circular structures that are the gastric glands. All of this kind of lighter pink that's filling in the spaces there would be lamina propria. This would be the muscularis mucosae coming across here. This is submucosa, and that's about all you're seeing on that diagram. Here's a better one that shows you more of the anatomy. So these little indentations are the gastric pits. As they go down deeper, they become the gastric glands. This is the muscularis mucosae that's coming across here. That's the submucosa in there. And then all of this is the muscularis layer. Now, I mean, sometimes it's kind of hard to see the differences between the different muscularis layers. So, you know, kind of base it on what you know the position should be. You know, if I'm pointing to like this part of the muscle that's close to where the submucosa is, then you should know that that's like the inner oblique layer. If I'm pointing somewhere like in the middle, well, that's going to be the middle circular layer. And then if I'm pointing toward the outside, that's going to be the outer longitudinal layer. Here's more stomach. So the little indentations are the gastric pits. As they go down deeper, you see these circular structures. Those are the gastric glands. So, you know, sitting up here in the gastric pits and on the surface, that's where you have the mucus-producing cells. Once you get down in the gastric glands, that's when you have the guys that make the parietal cells that make the acid, or the chief cells that make the pepsin and all that stuff. They're going to be sitting in there. Filling in the spaces here is the lamina propria. This line coming across here is the muscularis mucosae. This is the submucosa. And then this is the muscularis layer right here. Actually seems kind of thin. I don't know what part of the stomach this was from. And then this final edge that you see down here would be the serosa. And the serosa is going to be really thin. It's going to be a simple squamous epithelium, so it's going to be really thin. One more of the stomach. So the gastric pits are the little indentations. The oval and circular shaped things are the gastric glands. Lamina propria is the whitish area kind of filling in there. The darker pink that's coming across is the muscularis mucosae. This is all submucosa in here, and then you're just seeing a little bit of the muscularis layer starting down there. So that's probably like the inner oblique layer. One more, sorry, I thought we were done with the stomach. Here's just a super duper close up of the stomach. Gastric pits coming in. By the way, all these little white spaces that you see there, those are goblet cells. You have a lot of goblet cells in your GI tract as well, because they're making like mucus and things there too. This is the lamina propria. The round circular structures are what happen when the gastric pits go deeper and they form the gastric glands. This is the muscularis mucosae. And then this is all submucosa, and that's all you're going to get on this one. They're up too close to see the other layers. This is the small intestine. You should see more distinct kind of finger-like villi when you're looking at. I know at first glance you may have a hard time telling the small intestine from the stomach, but you know, look for more separate finger-like structures that are the villi, as opposed to like the gastric glands or gastric pits that you see in the stomach. Same type of deal though. You'll have the epithelial layer. If you have good eyesight, you can see some little white spots. Those would be goblet cells that are there. This is all lamina propria. This kind of line coming across here would be the muscularis mucosae. This stuff in here is the submucosa, and those are all glands. So those are like the Brunner's glands. You find a lot of them in the duodenum. This then is the muscularis layer, and I can sort of convince myself of kind of a vague, like, sort of line coming across here. So this would be the inner circular layer, and then this would be the outer longitudinal layer. And then this part down here is kind of interesting, actually. This is actually adventitia. The duodenum is interesting. It's a retroperitoneal organ for the most part. if you take a sample of the anterior wall of the duodenum, you're going to see serosa there. So you're going to see peritoneum there, so you'd call it serosa. But if you take a sample of the posterior wall of the duodenum, there's not going to be any peritoneum there, so it would actually be adventitia. And that's what you're seeing in this. So that's adventitia, not serosa that's down there. This is more duodenum. So these are the finger-like villi. Then as you go deeper, those are the intestinal glands. They're also called the crypts of Lieberkühn. This is the submucosa. There's some glands in there as well. That's the muscularis layer. Once again, more small intestine. You can really see the separate villi going on up there. Another good one showing you the distinct kind of finger-like microvilli. You can really see the goblet cells that are inserted in there. Lamina propria on the inside. You can see a little bit of the muscularis mucosa. There's the submucosa with some glands there. This here is MALT. That stands for mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, so that's some lymphocytes that are there. This is, of course, from where? Pancreas. You see the islets of Langerhans. You see the acini. Most of it are acini, right? You have to kind of look for just to see the things. Here's another one of the pancreas. Again, you see the islets. All the other stuff are going to be acini. And then lastly, we have the liver. Each one of these things is a hepatic lobule. I know they look like a nice, neat hexagon when I showed it in the PowerPoint. They don't always look like that. These things that are in the middle are the central veins. The white spaces are the sinusoids. Those are the blood vessels. And then in the corners, not all the corners, but a lot of the corners, you should find three structures, and that's called the portal triad. So if you do a close-up of one of those corners, this is what a portal triad looks like. The biggest guy is going to be the vein, so that's the vein. The guy that has some obvious smooth muscle in its wall is going to be the artery. And then the other guy that usually has like darker staining nuclei, looks like it has a simple columnar or simple cuboidal epithelium, that's going to be the branch of the bile duct. Okay. One more. So this is the branch of the hepatic portal vein. This is the branch of the hepatic artery. And then this guy here would be one of the branches of the bile duct. Okay. All right. Any questions about any of that stuff? There was a lot to go through. All right.